You walk into another room to get something. By the time you get there, it's gone. Not the room, the reason. You stand in the doorway, blinking, trying to retrace the last 10 seconds of your own mind. And for a moment, you feel a strange kind of panic, like you've misplaced a piece of yourself instead of just an object. It feels like staring at a word that's sitting right there, just past the edge of your vision. Annoying, familiar, almost universal. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. Your brain is not actually blank right now. It's holding something, a shape with no label attached to it, a locked door with light leaking out from underneath. That specific sensation, the one where you know you knew something but can't reach it, has a name, and scientists have been studying it since the 1960s. So what is actually happening when you forget something? The real answer is far stranger than the memory disappeared, because in most cases, it didn't disappear. It became unreachable, and your brain knows the difference between those two things, even when you don't. In 1966, two researchers at Harvard, Roger Brown and David McNeil, gave people definitions of obscure words and asked them to name the word being described. Sometimes people knew it instantly, sometimes they had no idea, but sometimes something stranger happened. People would insist they knew the word. They could tell you how many syllables it had, they could tell you what letter it started with. They could even list other words that sounded similar, circling the target without ever landing on it. They just couldn't say the word itself. Brown and McNeil called this the tip of the tongue state, and what made it remarkable wasn't that people forgot, it's that forgetting, in this case, came packed with detail. You don't forget a word the way you forget something you never knew at all. You forget it the way you forget where you put your keys. The object still exists, you just can't see it from where you're standing. So why does the brain hang on to all of that surrounding information, while withholding the one piece you actually need? Part of the answer comes from a psychologist named Asher Coriat, who spent years studying what he called the feeling of knowing, the quiet certainty you get that an answer exists somewhere inside you, even before you found it. Coriat's experiments showed that this feeling is usually accurate. People who felt confident they would recognize an answer, even one they couldn't currently produce, were right far more often than chance would predict. Your brain, in other words, is monitoring itself. It knows roughly what it has stored, even when it can't open the file on command. There's a related puzzle hiding inside all of this. Why does an unfinished thought nag at you so much harder than a finished one? In the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik noticed that waiters in a busy restaurant could recall complicated, unpaid orders in perfect detail, but the moment a bill was settled, the details vanished almost instantly. She brought the idea into the lab and found the same pattern again and again. Interrupted tasks stay vivid in memory, completed ones fade fast. Your mind, it turns out, keeps a kind of open tab running for anything left unfinished, and an interrupted intention, like walking into a room for a reason you can no longer name, behaves exactly like one of those open tabs. It isn't filed away cleanly because it was never closed in the first place. To understand why opening the file is so unreliable, even when it's still open, you have to go back further, to 1880s Germany and a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus did something nobody had really done before. He tested his own memory, over and over, memorizing meaningless syllables and timing exactly how fast he forgot them. What he found became one of the most replicated patterns in psychology. Forgetting isn't random, and it isn't a straight line. It's fast at first, brutally fast. Within an hour, you can lose half of something you just learned. Then the curve flattens. What survives that first hour tends to stick around far longer than people expect. This is your brain doing something specific, deciding almost immediately what's worth the cost of keeping. And that's the part that surprises most people. Memory was never built to hold everything. It was built to filter, which means forgetting isn't a flaw in the system. It's the system working exactly as designed. Your brain is, at every waking moment, deciding what to throw away long before you ever get a say in it. Imagine if it didn't. Imagine remembering every face on every commute, every word of every conversation, every meal, every weather report, every forgettable Tuesday for your entire life, all weighted equally, all competing for space. You wouldn't be able to think, you'd drown in your own footage. So your brain compresses. It keeps outlines and throws away most of the detail. It keeps emotional spikes and lets the flat, ordinary minutes evaporate. Most of the time, that's not even a loss you notice, because you were never trying to remember the ordinary minutes in the first place. Can you remember what you had for lunch 11 days ago? Probably not, and you've never once lost sleep over it. But sometimes the system glitches in a way you do notice, like walking into a room and forgetting why. In 2011, a psychologist at the University of Notre Dame, Gabriel Radvansky, ran an experiment that explained exactly why that happens, and it had nothing to do with how old you are or how distracted you were. It had to do with doors. Radvansky had people carry objects through virtual rooms, sometimes crossing a threshold into a new space, sometimes just walking the same distance within a single room. Same distance, same task, same amount of time passing, but crossing through a doorway made people far more likely to forget what they were holding or why they were holding it. He called it the location updating effect, though most people now just call it the doorway effect. Your brain, it turns out, treats a new room like a new chapter. It files away the previous scene to make space, almost like closing a tab you weren't using anymore. The problem is, your intention, the actual reason you walked in there, sometimes gets filed away with it, swept up in the same motion as everything else from the room you just left. So the memory isn't lost in any permanent sense. It's been archived under the wrong heading. Which brings the question back around. If forgetting is really just misfiling, why does it feel like loss? Why does it feel personal, like a small failure of character, when really it's just an overworked filing system doing its job a little too efficiently? This is where a Harvard psychologist named Daniel Schachter changed how forgetting gets talked about. In his research on memory errors, Schachter described what he called transience, the gradual fading of a memory's clarity over time, as one of several normal and expected weaknesses of memory, not malfunctions, not signs of a brain falling apart, predictable, almost scheduled costs of having a memory system built for survival rather than for archiving everything in perfect detail. Your ancestors did not need a flawless recording of every day they lived. They needed to remember where the water was, which berries made them sick, who could be trusted, and who could not. A brain that holds on to pattern and consequence, while letting the unremarkable details quietly dissolve, was the brain that kept making better decisions with less storage to manage. That's the brain you inherited. It wasn't optimized to remember your life. It was optimized to keep you alive long enough to have one. So the next time you forget something, and it nags at you, sitting right at the edge of your thoughts, what you're actually feeling is not absence, it's the opposite. It's your brain telling you, accurately, that something is there, just behind a door it can't quite reopen yet. That's why tip of the tongue moments so often resolve themselves later, usually right when you've stopped trying. You're in the shower, or half asleep, or doing something completely unrelated, and the word just arrives, unprompted, like it had been waiting in the hallway the whole time. Because it had been. You weren't searching the wrong room, you were standing in the doorway, and the room simply hadn't opened yet. Think about how often this happens now. In a world that hands you doorways constantly, a notification interrupts a thought mid-sentence. A tab switch interrupts a train of reasoning before it finishes. You walk from your desk to the kitchen and back a dozen times a day, and each trip quietly archives whatever you were holding in your head a moment before. The same way Radvansky's volunteers lost track of objects the instant they crossed a threshold. Your phone alone can manufacture dozens of doorways an hour, each one asking your brain to file away the last thought and open a new tab. You were never built for that many rooms in a single day. Nobody was. Your brain isn't broken by any of this. It's doing exactly what it has always done, just at a pace and frequency it was never designed to filter through. The forgetting feels like a modern failure, but the machinery behind it is ancient. The same compression system that once helped your ancestors decide what was worth remembering, when storage space, quite literally, came at a survival cost. It's worth noticing that humans solved this problem long before psychology gave it a name. You write a note before you forget the thought. You leave your shoes by the door, so tomorrow's intention waits for you at exactly the right threshold. You set a reminder on your phone, which is really just a Zeigarnik tab you've outsourced to a machine, so your own mind doesn't have to keep holding it open. None of that is a workaround for a broken brain. It's a tool built for a brain that was only ever meant to handle a fraction of the doorways it now crosses in a single day. So maybe the question isn't why you forget so much. Maybe it's why, with everything working against you, doorways and notifications and tabs all competing for the same narrow channel of attention, you still remember as much as you do. You walked into another room to get something, and somewhere behind a door in your own mind, it's still there, waiting patiently for you to walk back in.